Hi, everyone who's joining now. We're just going to give people a few minutes to get online. We'll get started. Hi, everyone who's logging on. We're going to give people just a couple of minutes to get online, and we'll get started in a few minutes. Okay, Dr. Pernell, I'm sure we'll have a few more people trickling in, but excited to get started. I'm Ranjana, for any of you who are logged on who don't know me. I'm the Managing Director of Operations across Newark and Camden, and I am so thrilled to be joined by Dr. Pernell today. Dr. Pernell, I have to tell you that you haven't met me before, but I was on the panel that you did for our staff and families last spring, and it was so informative and so helpful for me in making my own personal decision. So I wanted to say thank you for that. And thanks, Princess, I'm not sure if you're on, but Princess Williams, our founding school leader at Truth, introduced Dr. Pernell to me, and she was willing to come and answer questions for staff members today. So just wanted to say thank you.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to sing your praises a little bit and just kind of walk through your resume, which is as impressive as you are, but also if there's any other experience after I name that you'd like to add, Dr. Pernell, I'll turn that back over to you. Dr. Pernell is the Chief Strategic Integration and Health Equity Officer at University Hospital in Newark. She is also an associate professor at the NYU College of Global Public Health in New York, and she's a fellow of the American College of Preventative Medicine, and an incredible and very informative panelist, which I'll add to that from my own experience. Dr. Pernell, any other experience you'd like to highlight for this group?
Sure, just one correction. So I'm no longer at NYU. I was an adjunct associate professor there. I'm now a clinical assistant professor at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, in addition to working at University Hospital. And public health is my passion. I want people to know that. So I speak to groups quite frequently around issues of importance to public health, in particular to this pandemic. I lost my father. And losing my father during this time really has been integral to my voice, my lived experience, and my narrative. And so when I speak to you, I don't only speak from a professional place. I don't only speak to you from a place of, a standard clinical provider or physician, but I speak to you from a place of being a daughter of someone who lost a loved one, a sister to a breast cancer survivor who also had COVID and is what we call a COVID-19 long hauler, and having lost 2 of my cousins and 13 staff members here at University Hospital. So there is a wealth of information that I share, and I just want you all to know where I'm centering these responses and how I'm joining you today.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Pernell. I'm really honored to have you here sharing both those experiences and just your medical expertise. That's actually, the purpose of today's panel is just that, for those of you who are on, to answer the medical questions that many of you submitted ahead of time. And I have grouped those into 10 major categories. And Dr. Pernell, I'll ask those to you and then also try to get to the real specifics that staff members submitted, because this is an area where people really do have specific details that are kind of personal to them and their decision. My first question, which you started to answer, is how did you make that decision, your own personal decision around the vaccine? What factors did you consider as a medical professional, and just as a human? Would love to hear that.
Definitely. So I want to paint the picture for everyone. So we're in the spring of 2020 in New Jersey. We are the current epicenter of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, alongside New York. Newark, New Jersey in particular is the epicenter of the epicenter, meaning that the worst, the brunt of the pandemic is flaring or raging in that community. And I'm seeing a hospital overwhelmed in many ways, with patients struggling to live, struggling to recover, families impacted by loss. Our community here of workers, we had been impacted by loss. We had lost our first worker, Kim King Smith, roughly around March time. And I can recall one discrete experience. I was the administrator on call, and I get a phone call and they says, Dr. Pernell, we have no more room to place the bodies. And I have to start there, because we were in the thick and fog of a war, a public health battle for lives. And being a public health physician, I am in this profession because it is a calling, because it is a purpose. I thought I was going to be a brain surgeon. I spent the bulk of my adolescence and young adult life preparing myself for the eventuality, the inevitability of becoming a brain surgeon. But something happened to me along the way. I matured and developed into a woman in covenant with community that loved public policy, loved politics, and loved health equity and issues of justice. So that being my bedrock, and then seeing so many people struggle, I needed a way to be a part of the solution. My father was a research scientist, and my dad was quite a character. And he used to say, follow the data, follow the science. And my father had chronic HIV infection, and he lived and modeled science in action. My father was able to live as long as he did with chronic HIV because of the advances of medicine, because of the advances of clinical research. He used to plot out and track his T cells and take this information into appointments with his infectious disease doc. So I knew personally the benefits of clinical research. And while knowing personally the benefits of clinical research, I am a Black woman who will never deny the pain, the oppression of racism. I felt it. I've experienced it. I've experienced it being a physician. I've seen my parents suffer at the system of racism. My mother had a splenic artery aneurysm, which wasn't diagnosed in a timely fashion because the doctor said, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. Literally walked into an emergency room and walked out. And those struggles are seared on my heart and seared in my person. So that collective truth, I needed a way to be a part of the solution. And for me, being a part of the solution, knowing all that I knew and all that I experienced, was to enroll for a coronavirus vaccine trial. And I did it at a time where only early phase trials had been done. I knew that there had been no serious medical events. I'm well aware of the sordid past of racism in clinical research in America. And so I had questions that needed to be answered by the principal investigator. I wanted to ensure that everyone who was enrolling was doing it, not under duress or being coerced, but because it was voluntary and they wanted to be a part of a process. I wanted to ensure that no serious medical events had happened in the trials to date before me joining. And I knew that we needed a very powerful tool to beat back COVID. And knowing all of that, being a prayerful woman, I prayed. And at first my family was like, you don't need to do this. And I was like, I do. I need to do this. If anyone needs to do it, I need to do it. Because when I speak to a community, I have to speak from a place of truth, and I have to speak from a place of accountability. So I signed up. I got my first injection August 31st. I got my second injection the very, very beginning of October of 2020. And at that point, I didn't know if I had the active vaccine or if I had the placebo, salt water, because that's how they do these trials. When the vaccines became available to healthcare workers through emergency use authorization in December of 2020, I knew that I soon was going to have a choice put to me as a healthcare worker. Do you want to get vaccinated? But I'm already in this trial. But I don't know if I have the real vaccine or if I have a placebo. So by January, Moderna made the decision to unblind participants. And that's what it's called when you learn which arm of the study that you're in. And I sat in this same chair in this same office, and the principal investigator called me and said, "Are you ready? Do you want to know?" And I was like, yes, I want to know. And she said, "You got the real vaccine." And I literally was like, "Daddy, I got it." Literally that way. And it felt like I'm really helping to solve this solution, this crisis. And that's why I participated. And I have gone on. I have a booster. As I just got my booster in the past 2 weeks or so as a part of the trial. And it's one of the best decisions I made in my life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What an incredible journey and decision that must have been at a time when there were so many questions.
Yes.
So I'm going to just start with the first pre-submitted question that we got. If we know that people who have gotten the vaccine can still get COVID, they can test positive, and they can still transmit it to others, then why are we saying that it is safer to get the vaccine and that it's safer? You know, we have a lot of teachers in our organization. We're a school. Why are we saying it's safer for kids if staff members are vaccinated, if staff can still test positive and transmit?
Very, very good question. Okay, so let's answer this in parts. If you are vaccinated with either of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines, right? They are mRNA vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines. The likelihood that you test positive for coronavirus is small. It is very small compared to the larger public. So let me give you all some stats, okay? There is no vaccine that's 100% effective. These vaccines were touting 90+% effectiveness, and that held up in real world studies, like after people have been vaccinated, not just trial data, but real world studies, millions upon millions upon millions of people being vaccinated. So I have a much smaller risk than an unvaccinated person of getting coronavirus. It is such that an unvaccinated person is 10 times more likely to get hospitalized because of coronavirus than me, who's vaccinated. And an unvaccinated person is 11 times more likely to die from coronavirus. Those differences are significant. In every state that is tracking this data, overwhelmingly, when I say overwhelmingly, I'm talking about 90+%, some states 95+%, some states 96, 97+% of those who are getting coronavirus are unvaccinated. It's nowhere near equal. It's not even 50-50. It's not even 70-30. It's not even 80-20. That's how dramatic the difference is, okay? And so with all vaccines, there will be a percentage of the population, a small percentage, that can still get the infection. Also, what we know is that if you do test positive, you are less likely to have severe disease. And I just described that in hospitalization and death rates, right? So it is very important for those communities, those racial and ethnic groups who have been disproportionately impacted, to understand that risk, okay? It's not normal. As a Black woman, I can name 3 people in my family who are now gone because of coronavirus, 4 who've been impacted. That's not normal. I want you to understand. Racism has structured risk because of exposures and access to opportunities differently among different groups. And so if you go to the CDC's website, and I'll try to dump some links in the box. If you go to the CDC's website, you will see across Blacks, Latinos, across Indigenous or Native population, disparate rates compared to white Americans of cases. That means infections, cases, hospitalizations, and death. Death is anywhere from 2 to 2.5 times higher in Black, Latino, and Native communities. Hospitalization rates can be as much as 3 and 3.5 times higher, and case rates can be as much as 2 times higher. That's significant.
Thanks for that. answer. Relatedly, and we're getting a few questions in the chat as well as some pre-submitted questions. If I've already had COVID and now I have natural antibodies because my body has responded, do I really need the vaccine in order to be safe and in order to keep others safe? And relatedly, will getting the vaccine somehow counteract those natural antibodies or destroy them so that I'm actually making myself less safe?
Okay, good. Great question. So first, so you all know my sister who had COVID and who had long COVID, I strongly encouraged her to get vaccinated because I saw the data and I saw the science and she got vaccinated. And I will also encourage her to get a booster. And so this is why. What we know is that when you have natural immunity, you produce a robust antibody response. You also produce a robust response in your memory B cells and your T cells as well, okay? What we know from those of us who have immunity from vaccination, the antibody response is stronger. And in particular, the antibody response is effective against Delta. It is not guaranteed that you as a person who has had coronavirus can have the same type of immunity against these variants that continue to appear. And the variants have been of varying degrees of concern. Delta is of a great concern because it's more contagious, it spreads more easily, and it causes more severe disease. So if you want to be protected against Delta, if you want to be protected with the widest and most enduring protection, you need to get vaccinated in addition to having had the disease. There is now a question around, is your immunity better, meaning I had the disease plus a vaccination than those of us who just had vaccination? You have something called hybrid immunity. So without that hybrid immunity, you are still susceptible to being exposed to a variant like Delta in particular. That's why it's really important to get vaccinated.
Great, thank you. And you might be uniquely positioned to answer this question because you were in the trial and might have asked this question yourself. But what exactly, and maybe we can start with the mRNA vaccines, and then I don't know if you have a separate answer for J&J, but what exactly is in these vaccines? What are they made of? And specifically, is there anything in them that is toxic?
Okay, great question. So as was explained, I volunteered for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine trial. The Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine are very similar. They are mRNA, messenger RNA vaccines. So what's in messenger RNA vaccines? The messenger RNA. And messenger RNA is just a string of amino acids. It's like a protein, right? And so encasing that messenger RNA, because it would not be stable otherwise, and you want it to be stable so it can enter the cell and then do what it's been designed to do. There is a fat-soluble lipid that surrounds it, right? So there are fats in the one polyethylene glycol in particular. That fat-soluble lipid surrounds the messenger RNA to give it integrity. In addition to that, there are salts and there are sugars. Those things are to also give it integrity and to make it more hospitable in the cell environment so that the vaccine can do what it's been designed to do. There is nothing toxic in the vaccine. The specific ingredients of the vaccine, I just generalized them. The specific salts, the specific sugars, and that polyethylene glycol plus the messenger RNA, which is, as people have described, a Snapchat message. It's a genetic recipe. It's a genetic blueprint. The messenger RNA gets injected into your cell, right? And if this full circle is the cell, the nucleus sits in one part of the cell, and the rest of that substance is called the cytoplasm. When the messenger RNA enters the cell, it never interacts with the nucleus where your DNA is, okay? It stays in the cytoplasm, the sticky part. In there, that messenger RNA produces proteins. And it produces a protein that is very similar to the spike protein in coronavirus. Producing those proteins causes the body to mount an immune response. The body gets rid of the messenger RNA, the body gets rid of the proteins, and all that you have left are those antibodies and those memory cells and those T cells that have been activated so that if your body gets exposed to the real thing, you are protected. The vaccine does not contain any live virus. The vaccine doesn't contain a weakened virus. The vaccine contains a recipe. That's it, a genetic recipe to create a protein. The J&J vaccine is a little bit different. It's a viral vector vaccine, meaning it uses another virus. That virus is attenuated. It can't replicate. It can't infect you, but it becomes a carrier, a vessel, a vector, right? And it has DNA instructions. That DNA instructions goes into the cell, goes to the nucleus, right? And the body then says, convert that DNA into messenger RNA, which goes back into the cytoplasm and makes proteins. So it has the same end product of the mRNA. And again, there is nothing in the J&J vaccine other than the DNA strands that have the code to say, create a particular mRNA and things to make it more stable. So that is the adenovirus that's been altered so it can't infect you.
That's really helpful. I'm a former science teacher, so really appreciated the diagram of the cell that you were describing. Is it accurate to say then that like what is left after you get the vaccine is still your natural antibody response in a really similar way?
It's your immune system that has just been revved up, okay? So I see a question, is the vaccine genetic altering? It doesn't alter your genes because it doesn't go where your genes are contained. Right? Especially the mRNA does not impact, never interacts with your DNA. The Johnson & Johnson that is a DNA strand, just gets converted in the nucleus so that it can be made into a messenger RNA. There is nothing that changes in your genome. It just tells, hey, your body is built to make antibodies. Your body is built to make memory B cells. Your body is built to make T cells against particular pathogens. And so that's what this vaccine is teaching your body to do. And then the messenger RNA gets degraded, broken down, and kicked out. And those proteins get degraded, broken down, and kicked out. This is how all vaccines work.
Really helpful. One really specific question in the FDA announcement when they officially approved, not the emergency authorization, but the Pfizer vaccine back in August, they had this kind of new word that they labeled it. I can't even pronounce it. Comirnaty is like what they said the Pfizer vaccine was going to be known as moving forward. One specific question is that a different content than the previous one?
You should just think about it as if you had a brand name. This is how this brand name is going to be known. Nothing of the ingredients changed. Nothing whatsoever. None of the ingredients. Okay. And just to follow up on this quick question, will it impact a woman's fertility? No, it's not able to impact a woman's or a man's ability to have children, because it does not even interact with sex cells and it does not alter your DNA. So the fact that it doesn't do either of those two things, it cannot impact your fertility. It's not possible. It's not scientifically possible.
Thanks for that. That's a question that we've gotten a lot. Just to like dig into while you're on the reproductive system, we have a full array of questions. I'll just name some of them. One is fertility for people who aren't even trying to have kids right now, which you answered. One is what if you are newly pregnant or very pregnant or have already given birth and are breastfeeding? Are there risks to the vaccine? Is it safe to get the vaccine for those?
Very good questions. Very, very good questions. Okay, so let's think about those who are of reproductive age and would like to have children one day. I've advised my teenage nieces to get the vaccine. And I would not have done that if I saw anything in the science that says in the future, my teenage nieces would not be able to have children should they choose to have them. I got it. I recommended friends. The bulk of the information that we have is now real world and study data. Okay, so let me explain that. When I enrolled in the trials, we did not include pregnant people. And now there is some debate about whether that was wrong. Perhaps we should have offered pregnant people the opportunity to be a part of the trials from the very beginning, okay? Since the trial data was made available, because healthcare workers were the first group to get access to the vaccine, we had pregnant healthcare workers get vaccinated. That's where that first crop of data, that's why we call it real world data. That's where that first crop of data became available. That first crop of data show that there were no adverse outcomes associated with the vaccine. The vaccine did not cause preterm delivery. The vaccine did not cause congenital anomalies. The vaccine did not cause any type of complications that threatened the pregnancy or threatened the unborn child, right? That would have shown forth in a very dramatic way in that healthcare worker pool. But now that pool has gotten larger and larger and larger. And it's not just in the US, it's across the world. We have conclusive data. And this is why the recommendation of the CDC, the recommendation of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology is very emphatic and very forceful. If you are pregnant, if you are breastfeeding, or if you are considering pregnancy, get vaccinated as a priority. Why? Because we now know that pregnant women have a higher risk of severe disease, meaning unvaccinated pregnant women who get COVID, unfortunately, have a higher risk of dying. Unvaccinated pregnant women or pregnant people who get COVID have a higher risk of harm to the fetus, have a higher risk of complications to the pregnancy. And if I could use this word, the authorities and agencies are screaming now for pregnant people to get vaccinated because that risk is severe. It's a steep risk. It's a steep climb in the risk. And so there is nothing in the data, in the clinical trial data, there is nothing in how the science worked, and there is nothing in the real world data that shows that there is a concern to fertility of pregnant people or the unborn child.
Thank you so much. I think that is a question that so many people have, given the age range of so many of our staff members. One other question that you have touched on, but want to just really ask point blank, is we know that there have been controlled trials for the vaccines, but who was in these trials, and was it a diverse group of people? Specifically, was it racially diverse? And if you are a member of a minority group, which many of our staff members are, should they feel confident that the vaccine has been tested on people like them?
Perfect. Okay. So as a Black woman, and as a Black woman who does racial justice, health justice, and social justice work, this is where I live. I think about these issues every day. And I was just on a panel in Washington, D.C., where we were talking about issues of health equity, and how there has been systems of medical apartheid in the United States. Because Moderna did not have as diverse participation as the federal government was recommending, Moderna doubled back, right, and extended its trial period so that more diverse persons could participate. If you look at the end data between Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer, roughly around 10% of the trial participants were Black or African American in the Moderna and Pfizer groups. Johnson & Johnson does have a little bit of a higher percentage, but Johnson & Johnson has that higher percentage because the trials were done globally. Okay, so in South Africa and places throughout the Latin America, as well as in the United States. Okay, but of those that were just done in the United States, roughly around 10%. What you would like to see is that the percentage of persons participating in the trial approximates the percentage of those persons in the broader population. So we're roughly around 13% African Americans are in the American population. So we approximated it. That is rare. That is rare in clinical research. If I can sound that alarm for people, we, persons of color, have to be given opportunities to participate in clinical research for that research to be more representative. And usually why persons of color don't participate in research is, one, because the research is not messaged or communicated in socially and culturally fluent terms, understanding historical concerns, understanding contemporary injustices. We don't take into consideration issues around access, meaning time, meaning transportation. We don't take into concern issues around literacy. Do people understand what's going on? So because of that poor track record, and because of how important this was, there was a push to ensure that Black and Brown people had the opportunity to participate. It was still voluntary, and it still had to abide by ethical guidelines and have to use informed consent. But there was a specific effort to ensure. So you saw presidents of Black medical schools stepping up and saying, this is a good idea to participate. I participated for that reason. You had an African American woman scientist who was at the helm of one of the labs that designed this vaccine. So that opportunity for me to be a part of a trial that is because of the genius of Black excellence is something that I jumped at. And I really want people to know, even around just not diversity by race or ethnicity, there was diversity by age and there was diversity by condition. You had to have people who had chronic health conditions to make sure that the vaccine provides the same level of safety and efficacy, meaning benefit, protection against the pathogen in those persons, because they appear in different scenarios and in real life they work different jobs, not because they're genetically different, but because they appear in different scenarios in real life. And so this is the best we've actually done in a very long time. We need to do better, but this is the best we've done in a long time.
Thank you. We have questions about side effects and
Yes.
adverse effects that might come from the vaccine. Could you just talk a little bit about what people might expect?
So it's a difference. I want people to understand there's a difference. Okay. So side effects are routine. Side effects are normal. Side effects are expected. It does not mean you are sick, meaning infected with anything. It means your immune system is working. So I'm gonna give everybody an example. So frequently when people get their flu vaccine, plug, if you're not vaccinated against the flu, you should go out and get your flu vaccine at this time. I'm a public health physician. I believe in this. And so typically when a person gets vaccinated, they say, oh, the flu vaccine gave me the flu. No, it didn't. The vaccine produces an inflammatory response. And that inflammatory response that you feel is similar to the inflammatory response you feel when you are sick. But that inflammatory response is your immune system doing what it was designed to do. So it's your immune system building antibodies. It's your immune system building memory B cells. It's your immune system building those fighter T cells. That's what you feel. That's why you feel the soreness. That's why you feel the aches. That's why you can get a fever. That's why you get chills. Okay, so that's routine. Pain at the injection site, that site was the most frequent side effect or symptom that people experience after being vaccinated. That's what I experienced. I can tell you, so when I got my first dose, I got pain in my arm. I still was able to go to work every day. It was sore. It felt like when I got the tetanus injection. That's a bigger bolus, so it hurts more. Flu hurts, but not as much as I think as tetanus does. So if anyone out there has ever gotten tetanus, it felt kind of like that to me. After vaccination, you could take Tylenol after, and I'm stressing after vaccination, you can take Tylenol, or after vaccination, you could take an Advil or any other form of ibuprofen, and that pain goes away. I also got headaches, okay? The second vaccination, I got a lot of fatigue. I felt very, very tired. It lasted for about half a day. I woke up the next day and I was back to my normal self. With my booster, I felt pain in my arm and I felt headache. Those are the most of the symptoms that I've experienced. I had a friend who got his booster. He felt soreness, body aches, and he got a fever and he got chills. Within 24 hours, those were gone. And so those are all routine and to be expected because your immune system is working. Adverse reactions are different. It's like if you get the vaccine and then you develop hives, you get the vaccine and you get shortness of breath. If you get the vaccine and you have the most life-threatening adverse reaction there is, anaphylaxis, right? Your throat is swelling and you cannot breathe. There were very, very rare instances of anaphylaxis. No one who suffered anaphylaxis died. Everyone had their anaphylaxis treated and immediately reversed, but it was so rare. You would have to have, I want to give people an understanding of how rare it was. A couple of million people would have to get vaccinated before you would see even one episode of it, okay? Or maybe 3 or 4, a handful of episodes of it. That's how rare it is. I counsel family members who have allergies to food, because I get this question a lot, allergies to food. They got vaccinated without problem. I have a family member who has history of anaphylaxis that got vaccinated without a problem. And there are even some who recommend that even if you have an allergy to the specific ingredients in the vaccine, you should still get vaccinated because there has never been a case of anyone who would not be treated for their anaphylaxis, and the protection against COVID is a greater benefit than the risk.
Wow, that is powerful and definitive. I think you have answered this, but I just want to be really specific with a pre-submitted question. a person has read that there are significantly higher adverse reactions to the COVID vaccine than to all other vaccines in history.
Not
Okay,
true.
so not true. And then the related
Can I say
question.
something about that really quickly?
Yes.
So let me help people understand. Okay. And so I was just having this conversation with someone. And they're like, well, how do you know what information you can trust? Okay. This is a way for you to know what information you can trust. The information should appear in multiple reputable and credible health or news websites. For instance, it should be on the CDC's website. It should be on the World Health Organization's website. It should be on academic institutions' website. It should be on, for instance, for my group, APHA. It should be on the American Public Health Association's website. It should be on even those societies or professional groups that are geared towards certain groups, like the National Medical Association, which represents Black physicians and Black physician scientists. It should be on our website. If you are finding information that you cannot verify or confirm with multiple credible sites, that information most likely is untrue. The information that the side effects associated with the COVID vaccine are higher than any vaccine in history, that's just not true.
Yep. I appreciate that. And similarly, I think you answered this with the anaphylaxis explanation, but have there been, to your knowledge, any reported deaths that were caused directly by the vaccine?
No, not directly caused by the vaccine. So that's a very, very good question. I'm glad people are asking that. I've been talking about this. So for instance, and this was a very, very unfortunate scenario. There was an older person who got vaccinated. I want to say in New York, got vaccinated, left the vaccination site, tripped, fell, hit his head, and he died, right? So because he got vaccinated that day, you have to report any event that happens, and the CDC tracks it, and then the CDC looks at the data, okay? So though there are correlations, people who have been vaccinated and then have died because of something else, okay? People try to hijack, and I say hijack deliberately, the story of Hank Aaron. So Hank Aaron is the world famous baseball player. Hank Aaron was also in his 80s. Hank Aaron got vaccinated. And I want to say within some space of time, Hank Aaron died. He did not die because of the vaccination. It would be like me getting in a car accident and losing my life. It's not because of the vaccination. And the way that we know that is that the data has been meticulously combed through. And there is no direct link between the vaccine and death. There is none. What we do know with Johnson & Johnson is that there is a rare but serious blood clotting adverse reaction that led to sickness and death in a very few cases of premenopausal women. So 18 to say less than 50, okay? Because menopause can happen for different people at different ages. In that group, there was that very small, but it's a serious risk, right? So we make sure. I counseled a friend who lives in Texas. I've known her since college. She hates vaccines. I used to hold her hand in college. So she was like, look, Chris, I don't get vaccines. I don't do vaccines and I need to be vaccinated. I want to get the Johnson & Johnson. Talk me through this. And I said, as long as you know that there are other vaccines that don't carry that very small but serious risk, and as long as you know that it has occurred in women of the same age group that you are, it is an informed choice and decision. It is still so rare that it's not likely to happen to you. That is the closest link of a vaccine contributing to someone's death. Those cases of the blood, not everyone who had the blood clotting disorder died. We think those who died who had the blood clotting disorder, it was because of how they were treated, because physicians did not realize the particular type of blood clot it was. It occurs in the venous system in the brain. Because of the particular blood clot that it was, they treated in a way that caused, let's say, more distress, more adverse outcomes, and that can contribute to their death. Other than those cases, there is no direct link between any vaccine contributing to someone's death. There just isn't one. And we have been focusing on this meticulously.
That's really helpful and is related to another question, which is
Mhm.
which vaccine is the best? Now,
Ooh,
at the beginning, we often didn't have a choice for people who got
yes,
vaccinated
you have a
early, but now people
choice.
have a choice. So what would you
Yes.
recommend?
Okay, so let me say it this way. This is how I said it to people before. If you're going to tell me the only way I'm going to get vaccinated, right? Let's say when Johnson and Johnson was 1 dose and Moderna were the 2 dose vaccines. If you were going to tell me there's only one way I'm getting vaccinated, if it's one shot, I'm going to tell you that it's of a greater benefit for you to do the one shot, right, than to not get vaccinated. Now we know more. We know more. We have more data. We know that, especially because of the Delta variant and how our immune systems are built, Johnson and Johnson most likely should have been a 2 dose series to provide the strongest protection. Does the 1 dose provide protection? Yes, but it doesn't provide as good protection as Pfizer or Moderna, right? And so there's even some difference between Pfizer and Moderna, although there isn't one clear-cut opinion that one is better than the other. We can't say that definitively quite yet. We can say that the data is suggesting that Moderna has a broader effectiveness and may be more durable than Pfizer, but by a few percentage points, not as wide a difference as between Johnson & Johnson and the rest of the messenger RNA vaccines. So if you had Johnson & Johnson, I do recommend you go ahead and get a second shot. And I do recommend you get a shot with a messenger RNA vaccine.
That's really helpful. And is that advice any different based on age? We've got a lot of young staff members, and some people are saying for the younger
Well,
variation, do you
yeah.
recommend one?
There's only one vaccine that's eligible right now across a wide age spectrum. That's Pfizer. And so Pfizer is eligible for 12 all the way as old as you get. That's the only one. Moderna has submitted data to the FDA, but that data just hasn't led to an authorization. So there's only one choice. I don't expect that to always be the case. It could very well be the case that Moderna and Pfizer will be made available to those who are younger. But right now, it's only Pfizer. And today, the FDA's advisory panel voted that the Pfizer version of the vaccine for those from the 5 to 11 age group should be authorized. Next, we're going to wait for the CDC to either confirm that decision or to make different recommendations, but it's still just Pfizer that has that eligibility. Moderna should be, I think we'll see those announcements, but the FDA just hasn't come up with a decision.
Great. Focusing now on like more like our staff members who are on the younger age, like 20s, maybe early 30s.
Yes.
You know, many people have the impression that the highest risk people you were talking about, Dr. Pernell, who might have gotten serious illness, hospitalization, death due to COVID, were older or had serious conditions. If you are young and you are healthy, why should you bother to get the vaccine?
Very good. So I just put a second link in the chat box, and this link is from the CDC's website, and this link shows the risk of COVID-19 infection, hospitalization, and death by age group. I'm going to also put a link up that shows that difference in risk by race and ethnicity too, because I want you all to have it. But think about it this way. The 18 to 29-year-olds, and I'm reading this exactly, right? The 18 to 29-year-olds are what we call the reference group. They are the reference group because they have the largest number of cases, okay? If that is our reference group, 30 to 39-year-olds have 2 times the risk of hospitalization. 30 to 39-year-olds have 4 times the risk of death. It doesn't mean that 18 to 29-year-olds don't have a risk of death and don't have a risk of hospitalization. It means that just within a 10-year span, that risk can increase dramatically, okay? But why would you take that risk at all? If you had something that could protect you, why would you take that risk? And this is something I'm trying to help people understand, especially because what we know in the Black and Brown population, the risk is higher versus than for white Americans. And Black and Brown persons experience similar risk profiles of white Americans at least 10 years older than them. And remember, that risk is not because of genetics. That risk is because of life conditions that determine exposures. Let me explain that. If you live in a crowded or cramped dwelling, where if one person got infected, they're not able to isolate, or if one person got exposed, they're not able to quarantine, then those others in the household are more likely to be impacted. If you work in a job that is has intimate contact with other persons, or a job that you cannot work remotely, you have a higher risk of exposure. Black and brown persons work in service industries at a higher rate. So not only do they live in crowded, cramped dwellings at a higher rate, they also have a higher risk exposure because of where they work. The third risk of exposure is public transportation. If you take public transportation, you are oftentimes in a more intimate setting with various different persons in the public. That is a third layer of risk that you are exposed to. So even if you are young, because of the other risk factors associated with conditions of your life, you should get vaccinated. And another thing I want people to understand, there is no way to predict. I'm sorry, there just isn't. We can look at the data and we can say, oh, if a person has asthma, if a person has diabetes, they are more likely to have worse outcomes. But it doesn't explain why the healthy 17 or 18-year-old dies from COVID, and it's happened. It doesn't explain why the marathon runner gets long COVID. And that's the other thing. People are saying, well, I'm young, I'll get COVID, I'll get over it, my immune system is strong. What if you get long COVID like my sister? She could not breathe normally and had a racing heart rate for almost 11 months. She couldn't stand up to do her job. We have seen long COVID effects in children. Why would you want children to be exposed to the risk of long-term neurological effects because of COVID infection, even if they recovered from it? Think about it that way.
I think that's especially helpful because as a school district, you know, we are around kids, whether we have them in our homes or not, all of the time. And so I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, my 10-year-old niece is eagerly awaiting to get vaccinated. One, she has an aunt who's a public health physician, and two, she's written a letter to the world. Kaya's written a letter to the world asking adults who are eligible to please get vaccinated to protect someone like her who doesn't have that choice yet.
Hopefully coming soon. Talk to us, you mentioned that you got your booster 2 weeks ago. As educators, our staff members who got vaccinated in the spring are now becoming eligible for the booster. Do you recommend it? And yeah, I have some other questions about how many shots people can take, but I'll start with that one. Do you recommend the booster?
Okay, great. So I've spent a fair amount of time talking about this in the public. Our first priority as a nation, and we always have to think through the collective lens when we're talking about equity and we're talking about a public health crisis. Our first priority as a nation should be getting unvaccinated people vaccinated. Every day and every time before I speak, I go to the CDC's website and I say, okay, where are we now? 57.5% of the population is fully vaccinated. We've got to do better than that, folks, because if we don't do better than that, the pandemic will continue to rage. As long as we have people who can become, I hate to use this word, but there's no other word, a host, and that the virus can mutate, the pandemic will continue to go on and on and on. Only thing that will stop this pandemic is having a critical mass of people vaccinated, plus wearing masks indoors, having clean and purified air, and taking into effect other mitigation strategies, okay? So testing and contact tracing, boom, in a nutshell. So with that being said, in addition to that, you know, you should think about, do I have chronic health conditions? What is my age? And where do I work? That's the priority level for getting a booster. I got a booster as a part of the study, but also I would have gotten a booster because I'm a healthcare worker and I'm in an environment where I'm exposed to sick people, okay? And I work in intimate contact, even though I'm not a direct patient care provider at this point. You work in education, you're in an environment that is intimate, meaning there are a lot of people that you have immediate access with. That career carries with it a certain level of risk. If you also have a chronic health condition and you're also a person of a certain age, and why the age is important there is because your immunity begins to wane. It's just not as strong the older you get. And we now know that these vaccines, they probably have a durability of some fixed amount. We're not quite certain what that amount is, but we know after the 6-month part, they do lag in their ability to protect and cover. So all of those things added up together, if you have access to a booster, yes, you should get one.
Thanks so much. And relatedly, if I've already gotten COVID, you answered before, I should, you believe the that
Yes,
person should
you
still
should.
get vaccinated.
Yes, hybrid immunity.
Should the person still get 2 doses of the Moderna or 2 doses of Pfizer, or does getting sick with COVID kind of act as their dose 1?
Okay, so the public health community is debating this, right? And this is also another point how you know whether or not you can believe something someone says. They tell you the truth of everything. The public health community is debating this, okay? So the majority of us in the public health community are still recommending that if you've had coronavirus, you should have 2 doses of the vaccination series, if that's what it is intended to be, because we don't have conclusive data yet to say it's okay for you just to get 1 dose. There have been people who have only gotten 1 dose, so data is starting to build and data is starting to emerge. And it does appear that people who have had coronavirus infection and have had at least 1 dose of an mRNA vaccine or other vaccine have this thing called hybrid immunity, which is very, very strong and very good. We still don't definitively know how long that lasts, and if there could be another variant that could become known to us that evades the immunity of those vaccines. So the best knowledge that we have right now, I would recommend for you to get both doses, but that could change.
We, as we've experienced this pandemic, have changed our parameters, changed so many things as guidance has changed. So I really appreciate you naming that, because we can only give an answer as good as like our current
what we know at the time.
So,
we can only answer what we know at the time.
Thanks for that. One question is about medical conditions. Are there any underlying medical conditions that you know of that if you have it and you're diagnosed with it, you actually should not get vaccinated?
Okay, I'm putting something in the chat box because I saw the previous questions, and if there's anyone out there with a blood clotting disorder, I like to go to those associations or societies and to give people very clear, emphatic responses. So there is no known contraindication to coronavirus vaccination. Okay. And so when we first had the recommendation come down from the FDA and the CDC, and the vaccines were only authorized, okay, what we called this, we would say there is no absolute contraindication. If you have had an allergic response to any of the ingredients in the vaccine, meaning you got 1 dose and you got hives, or you got 1 dose and you got anaphylaxis, or you got 1 dose and you were just struggling to breathe, initially we were telling people, don't get the 2nd dose. Now there is mounting evidence, and there are public health leaders who will say, even if you had an allergic response to the 1st dose, you should get the 2nd dose, because there is no one who's had an allergic response who was not able to be treated and that response reversed, right? So that's a level of nuance. You should have that conversation with a physician. I've talked people through this decision, and that's called shared decision making. Okay, that's a person doing something with full awareness of risk versus benefits. Okay, the next group that we were not as emphatic around were pregnant people, as I described, right? Because pregnant people didn't participate in trials, but now we have an abundance of evidence to show both that the vaccination is safe in pregnant people and that pregnant people have worse outcomes of coronavirus, that we are emphatically recommending pregnant people to get vaccinated. So I'm using those 2 scenarios to show people how the decision process works. We look at the data and say, what do we know about how these people fare with coronavirus infection versus how these people fare with a coronavirus vaccination. And specifically, I looked up for anyone who has a blood clotting disorder. I, at baseline, would have told you no, but I want to give you proof and evidence that there is no contraindication to you getting vaccinated. And so that's what I put in the chat box. Think about it this way. I've talked to people with lupus. I've talked to people with other various autoimmune disorders like multiple sclerosis. I've talked to people who have active cancer, blood cancers. The risk of you having coronavirus is worse than any potential risk that is associated with the vaccine. And the only thing an oncologist might do is tell you about the timing of your vaccine dose, not that you should not get it.
Great, thank you. Those are the pre-submitted questions that we got. There are a few more that have come in the chat. I just want to name for everyone that Dr. Pernell, we have her until 6:30 and not a minute later because she has another engagement tonight. So I did want to ask just maybe one or two more questions that came up that I don't know if we've gotten to. If you see one, Dr. Pernell, as you're looking that you want to answer?
I'm going to scan through all of them and see if I can group some of them.
Okay, great.
Okay, really quickly, long-term safety data available for any of the COVID vaccines. I love talking about this. I just had this conversation with someone last week. And so think about it this way. If you look across all vaccine research, okay, if a person is going to have an immune-mediated side effect or response or reaction to a vaccine, it is overwhelmingly likely that it's going to happen in the 6 to 8 weeks after the dose has been administered. It is infinitesimally rare that a side effect happens out of that 6 to 8 week window. That's why the FDA required at least 6 weeks of safety data. Okay, so does anyone know the long-term effects? No one knows the long-term effects longer than anyone who's been vaccinated. I got vaccinated, first dose August 31st, and I was at what was called the late phase trials. We have people who were vaccinated in the early phase trials, and the most of those were just vaccinated, let's say at most maybe 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months tops ahead of me. Okay, so now we're going into, I am a year plus being fully vaccinated, year and a half first vaccination dose. So that's the length of the information that we know from early phase trials through to today. But most vaccines, and I can't emphasize when I say most, like you can look through the research, if it's going to cause a long-term or it's going to cause I should say an immune-mediated effect, it's going to happen in the first 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, we will continue to follow people to learn more about how their bodies respond. There is no expectation that there's something that's going to happen 5, 10, or 15 years out. But we also don't know that people should know. We don't know the long-term effects of COVID. What we do know is that people still have symptoms 6 months out, at least sometimes half in certain studies and at least a third in other studies. So those are the two things that you want to weigh in your decision. So that's one. Another one that I wanted to address was this issue around if it's, I think it was, if it was a small amount, I think it was the first one that came in. Okay, yeah. How, like, if you know that there is a small amount of staff that are interacting in the ratio, I think it's with nearly 500 elementary school students ineligible, approximately 50 staff members, how impactful will the vaccination be against COVID-19 given the staff to student ratio? Very impactful. If you save one life, it's the universe to that one person. It's the universe to that person's family. I lost my father. If I could have saved his life, I would have jumped at it. What we see happening, and I want you to think about it this way, in long-term care facilities, workers who did not get vaccinated, and we had fully vaccinated older persons, and they got infected from a worker who did not get vaccinated, and they lost their life, that could have been prevented. And think about it that way. No one has to lose their life. We have such powerful tools and the tools are safe. So regardless of the ratio, yes, it makes a difference. It makes a difference for everyone to wear a mask and it makes a difference for everyone to get vaccinated. And try to just find one other quick one. We talked about that. Oh, this one is fascinating, right? I want to read this one. How do you reconcile that with countless women who have taken the shot and are experiencing change in menstruation? Stress can change your menstruation. The fact that you live in one confined setting with actively menstruating other people can change your menstruation. It's hormonal. So stress and other conditions that impact your hormones can change your menstruation. So there is nothing in the vaccine that, if you think about the ingredients, and I want to share those ingredients. So if I get off and I don't have time to share it, I'll email it to you and I want you to send it out to me.
We'll share it. Yeah.
There is nothing in the ingredients that should change someone's menstrual cycle, but the stress around, oh my goodness, I'm getting vaccinated, could very much change someone's menstrual cycle. And it could just be something that's a correlation, meaning you ate a hot dog then you went and had an accident, happened to 500 people. Doesn't mean the hot dog caused the accident. And I'm really using that example because that's what we do in science. We say, is this correlated or is this a direct cause and effect? Correlation are not cause and effect. There are things that happen together, but not because of one another.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pernell. It is 6:29, and I know you have a hard stop, but I cannot tell you how lucky we are to have had you here to answer questions, because people are really weighing a lot of things as they make a really important personal decision.
Yes.
And so thank you so, so much.
My pleasure, and don't hesitate to reach out to me, even if it's personal. A person has a question, I don't have a problem answering it. And please consider getting vaccinated if you're not vaccinated. It's a life-changing decision, not just for you, but for the community as a whole.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining. And we will follow up with the resources that Dr. Pernell put in the chat and that she sends us afterward.
Okay.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye.